Marhaban. Welcome. Welcome to the SeaWorld Research and Rescue Center. I am Dr. Elise Marquis, and I thank you all for attending this new science talk of the 2025 series. As you know, this series of science talk at the center is developed in close collaboration with the Environment Agency Abu Dhabi, with the Emirates Natural History Group Abu Dhabi, the Natural History Museum Abu Dhabi, and Nautica Environmental Associates. And tonight's science talk will highlight something that often goes unseen but plays a massive role in shaping life in the ocean: the physical movement and structure of the ocean itself, physical oceanography. The study of currents, waves, tides, and the ocean's physical properties isn't just about water motion. It's a foundation that supports and influences all marine life. Whether it's upwelling of nutrient-rich water that fuel plankton blooms, or the extreme conditions of the Gulf as we know it here. The physical dynamics of the sea are crucial, and without understanding these forces, any study of the marine ecosystems would be incomplete. So today, let's explore the invisible engine driving the ocean, and especially here in the Arabian Gulf, and why every marine biologist and conservationist should care deeply about physical oceanography. And to help us navigate this amazing topic, we have the honor to host two amazing researchers from New York University, Abu Dhabi, with us tonight. And before I start introducing them, please allow me to remind you that the question will be kept. You should keep your question for the end. We will have the two talks and then the Q&A session. And please refrain. I hope everybody had a nice drink and food. Please refrain from going in and out the room, and make sure that your phone is on off silence. So, I'm extremely honored to call on stage now as our first speaker of the evening, Dr. Georgenes Cavalcante. And Georgenes is actually a dear friend of mine. We were just speaking earlier, and it's almost to the day 18 years that we met, somewhere lost in Canada when we were preparing a long project to be carried out here in Dubai waters. With the United Nations University. Dr. Georgenes Cavalcante is actually currently a research scientist at the Mubadala Arabian Center for Climate and Environmental Sciences, ACCESS, at New York University, Abu Dhabi. He holds a PhD in physical oceanography and specializes in oceanographic instrumentation and numerical modeling. And prior to joining New York University, he was an associate professor at the Institute of Atmospheric Sciences, Federal University of Alagoas in Brazil. He also held a research position at the American University of Sharjah. And I will let him talk to you more about what he does here in the Gulf and in Brazil on the coastal ecosystem. Come over, Georgenes. It's not turning on. Sorry. Can we have someone? It's not turning on. I don't know. It's gonna come. No, it's not.
Oh my God, the laptop died.
All right. Give us 2 minutes. We're gonna solve that issue. Do you want to take your laptop? Maybe quickly?
It's up to you. If it is quick, we can just let him
because
stick it up.
Okay.
What is the light?
Coming.
This light?
Sorry.
Do you have light here? No. This is light. It's not, light here is not working.
Which one?
The light?
Oh no, you have to. There's no light. It's just a clicker.
Okay. Hello, good evening, everyone. Masala Her. It's a pleasure to be here, and I really, it's an honor being invited by Elise, my very, very good friend, a long time, 18 years now, and we have been a long path since then, and going through many institutions and countries. But yeah, once we are here, we never left UAE. So today I will be talk a little bit about some of the work that we have been doing, trying to bring some light on the physical oceanography aspect of the Gulf. So I will try to make you guys awake throughout my talk, because talking about physical oceanography is not so funny as marine biology. So I will do my best. Okay. So to start with, since we have very young people here, so I thought it was a good idea to talk about how old is the Gulf itself. So it's very young. See, in reality, this is among one of the youngest shallow marine system on Earth. It was, it's formed during the last ice age, about 14 to 8,000 years ago. Back then, the water level was about 120 meters below the level that we have today. And since then, we have about 8,000 years ago, we have the Gulf formed, so we have the whole area flooded. So some of the features that we know quite well is, which implicates, have a lot of consequences on the environment conditions that we have in the Gulf, is especially the depth. The Gulf is very shallow, so the average depth is about 35 meters, and it can go up to, let's say, max 90 meters depth when you, sorry, this one doesn't have a pointer, but yeah, the blue part on the Iranian coast. So the consequences of being have so shallow waters is that everything that happened goes throughout the whole water column because it's pretty shallow. So when you have some kind of variability, it will be, the effect is pretty fast. Another aspect very important is that the Strait of Hormuz, let's see if I can, anyway, the Strait of Hormuz in that area, I don't know if I have a, no, it's not, okay. So here is the Strait of Hormuz. This is where where there is this exchange in the water in and out to the Arabian Gulf. So it's very limited because the entrance is pretty narrow. So the amount of water in and out is very limited, making this exchange not very efficient. And because of the shallowness of the Gulf, the water and the temperature you have a strong evaporation rate. So you can see it's about 2 to 3 meters per year that evaporates. So it has to have some kind of inflow to compensate. But of course, it's quite a lot, and the discharge in and out is not very sufficient. That's why you're going to see that the Gulf have a lot of, the salinity in the Gulf is quite high. So like I said, because of the shallowness, this restrict exchange of water and the high heat and the evaporation, the Gulf is very sensitive to climate change, and that forms a perfect place, like a natural laboratory for us to study what would be the implications in terms of climate change and how we could learn from this place and apply that knowledge in the different area. So as we know, the Gulf is pretty saline, so the salinity in the Gulf, the average is from 38 to 42 particle salinity unit, but can also go above 45, depends on where you are. And the problem is that, like, if you consider all the water on the planet, so 97.5% is salt water. So this bubble here represents 2.5% of all the fresh water we have, but only this one here, well, anyway, I can. That one, the little bubble, represents the fresh water that we have access. So throughout the whole water that we have on the planet, 1% is fresh water that will be like easily accessible for us through lakes, rivers, swamps, and wells, which makes about 0.01% of the total water that we can consume, actually. So the problem is that in the Gulf, we have a lot of scarcity of fresh water. So most of the water that we consume, 53.3% of the water comes from desalination, and that's what we use on daily basis. So we can see that the environment is pretty harsh, and the water that we are use is very costly, and we should be very aware of that. So, but of course, we are not talking about how much water we have on the world. So we are talking about the physical oceanography of the Gulf. So there are three main forces that apply that are in the Gulf that controls how the water is moving. So there is the tidal force. That's the tide that is related to the moon and the earth gravitational force. So in the Gulf, we have the diurnal and the same diurnal force. So we have the up and down twice a day. We're going to show that. A second force is the wind-driven force. This is due basically the wind. And as we know here, we have a very strong wind. It's called Chamal winds, that they come from the northwest part that push the water towards the southern part, like the UAE coast most of the time. And the last one is the density-driven currents that's related to the salinity, temperature that makes the density varies, and then we have this water mass moving due to these three parameters. So that diagram, you can see that there is this strong evaporation throughout the year. Fresh water comes through the strait through the Strait of Hormuz. The salinity is about 36 PSU through the surface water, and then goes inside the Gulf. We have the evaporation, a lot of evaporation happen, and then we have an increase of salinity in the Gulf. The water gets very saline, gets a high density, and sinks, and then flows out of the Gulf along the bottom all the way through the Strait of Hormuz. So this is this kind of overturn circulation that happen on the Gulf in different scales. So talking about the tides, we have several constituents, but the major ones that controls the tides here in the Gulf. So we have the M2, S2, and K1. So M2 and S2, they are the same diurnal, so they control what's happened with the water level in the Gulf. So we expect to have 2 high tides and 2 low tides in the Gulf, but not at the same level. So they are semi-diurnal, mixed semi-diurnal tides in the Gulf. So the M2 tide, you can see that there is this kind of gyro, the anti-clockwise gyro, so the water goes in and they have this circle around and then come back. And there is a level that it stays at the same. So we have this, what we call amphidromic point, is where the water is just moving around, but the elevation remains the same. So how does it work? So imagine that you are moving from the Strait of Hormuz almost all the way to Abu Dhabi. So you can see in 2 days, if you are on the boat, you're going to face different phases in the water level. So here you can see the water is moving up and down. You can see that you have a low tide, high, low, but they are not equally. So they have a low tide. This is low tide, but this is higher than the first one because it's the same diurnal, mixed same diurnal. And then the zero line here, there represented the zero level. So the water is moving in, and then you see this movement of water going on the anti-clockwise movement, showing that this is the movement due tides. So this is what we face in the Gulf in terms of tidal forces. And then we have winds. So basically, we have the well-known winds, the Shamal winds, the northwest winds that push, so it's responsible for most of the storms. So we have these strong winds comes from the northwest all the way down to UAE coast. But we also have the Gulf wind, this is the southeast wind pushing the water on the opposite, so it's less frequency, but it can happen. The Sohaili wind also on the north direction, you can see through the Qatar lineman, and less frequently is the Nashi wind with less than 1% is happening in this region. So you have the whole system of wind pushing the water, depends on the specific event. And then on the right panel, you can see the diagram. This database is from 1979 to 2023, 45 years of wave and winds based on the numerical modeling. So you can see how the predominant are currents, waves based on wind. So it's pretty much, when we're talking about waves, they pretty much depends on the wind. So we're going to expect the same predominant direction based on the wind predominant direction too. So, but not only that, so not only waves, so we have the strong currents due to strong winds. Like when you have like strong events, Shamal events that last for 3-4 days, we ended up having this stretch along the whole Gulf area. It's a fetch. It's about 800 kilometers, so, and then pushes the water all the way down towards the UAE coast. So this is the second force that applies that contributes to the movement of water. But this event, the wind did not it's not strong winds. They are not happening throughout the whole year, but we have a specific time of the year that we have this events that's going to make a huge difference. As Elise mentioned, this is connectivity between the oceanography and what's going on in terms of the marine system has a lot to do with the oceanography. And the third component is the density-driven current. So we basically have this kind of temperature and salinity that we produce density. So the more saline water, the more dense, the more heavier is the water. So basically what we have is, if we imagine the diagram on the right top, have this cut through the Strait of Hormuz. So the water is, the way that I can explain this is somewhere, currents and salinity. So you have a two-layer configuration. So at the top, you see the water is moving in, like one of the first diagrams I showed. You have water coming inside the Gulf because it's less saline, and it's going from the Strait of Hormuz, Sea of Oman, Sea of Arabian Sea, all the way to the Gulf. And then you have the evaporation system happening, process. The water gets more saline, gets heavier, sinks, and then comes out through the bottom layer. So you can see from the summer to winter, during summer, we have strong currents in and out. And during winter, the bottom panel, you can see is slightly weaker, the water that, the movement of the water. And the same happened with the salinity. So in this in and out movement. So this is all year long. We have this two layers movement. This is what we call the reverse storing circulation. So we have water comes in at the top and out along the bottom. So in the estuary, you have the opposite movement of water. So everything is connected in the Gulf. So everything is, it's not because the Gulf has a very restricted exchange of water, doesn't mean that the water that goes in stays inside the Gulf. At some point, this water goes out, and then everything that happens in the Gulf can indeed influence even in the ocean. There are studies that are showing that the mass of the water that is formed inside the Gulf goes all the way to the Gulf of, all the way to the Indian Ocean, and that makes part of the whole conveyor belt circulation, the globe. So the bottom panel represents all the eddies that's formed throughout the year, and it has to do with the tides, waves, and density. So this is the combination of the three major forces in the area. And this bottom left panel, you can see the diagram show we have this water coming in at the top layer and then sinks in half of the way, and then some branch just keep going and then sinks again, sink again, and then comes down. So this is the typical circulation, overturn circulation in the Gulf. So that is numerical modeling. So, but of course, not only model that we're not going to use only models. So we need to get some in situ information to understand what exactly is going on. The model is pretty good, but it's important to have observation. So we have this station here in Serbonner. There in Serbonner, it's about 70 kilometers offshore. It's I have the equipment here, some of the equipment that we use there. So it's about 18 meters deep. So we have this instrument measure currents, waves, tides, temperature at different levels for a long period to make sure that we capture the whole seasonality and then use that knowledge in terms of how we can make that information for the numeric simulation that we are also doing. So based on that information, I just want to emphasize the top panel showing the long-term trend in terms of sea surface temperature. So you can see the decadal average is showing this step up kind of trend. So the temperature of the Gulf is getting warmer and warmer throughout the years, and then we don't see a scenario that could be different for at least for the near future, unfortunately. So this is the current trend that we see in terms of temperature of the Gulf. The middle panel, just to show you how extreme is the variability in the Gulf. You can see the temperature in February can go to 18, and August go all the way to 36 degrees. So have this big range in temperature, which is massive for marine ecosystem. And then that's why it's so important that understand how those marine systems got adapted in such extreme environment. It's important to understand how we could use this knowledge to different parts, because the globe is getting hot and hot. Having knowledge about how that environment cope with that extreme variability is quite important. So in Cerro Bonaire, we have this more than 1 year database for temperature. So you can see that this sensor is about 18 meters deep, but you can see that the water can go really hot, even at 18 meters deep. We have also sensors close to the surface, and that temperature already reached more than 36 degrees during July, August 2021. I don't have that plot, but the data set can see some periods that is above 36 degrees. So this is we are talking about temperature. So this is one component. When we're talking about salinity, this is the parameters that gives us the information about these two layers configuration. Because the more saline, the more heavy, and then you have this, like I said, this two layers movement. So what I want to bring attention is that, contrary to a lot of people, they think the Gulf, we have high salinity during winter compared to summer. So a lot of people think that because we have a lot of evaporation, so the salinity is very high during summer. Indeed, it is very high, but it's not the tip of that concentration. The reason is that during summer we have a very hot temperature, very warm temperature. Evaporation is quite high. We have a strong salinity, a strong concentration in salinity during summer, and then we are moving towards winter. What happens, even during winter, the temperature is cold. Indeed, it is cold, but it still is warm than the land temperature. So you still have evaporation happen during winter. During summer, the salinity is already high, but throughout the winter, the evaporation continues. So we have just an increment in that process, having the salinity, the evaporation just make the situation worse. This is one aspect. Another aspect that we saw that the water that's moving in and out of the Gulf during winter, that speed is a bit weaker compared to summer. So we have the water takes more time to go in and out of the Gulf. So it takes more time. It gives more time for the water to get mixed. This is a second aspect. Another aspect is during winter, temperature gets cold, the water gets more dense, more heavy, and then it sinks. And then during winter, we have this mix of the water, so the surface and the bottom that's already very salty, so it gets mixed, and then the whole water column gets salty because of this vertical movement contrary to summertime. And the last component, we have the Euphrates and Tigris rivers. So after summer, the discharge, they reduced, so we have less fresh water into the less fresh water into the system. Makes even more complicated because we have less fresh water, and then the salinity, it just go higher and higher. So throughout the year, we do have a salinity a little bit higher compared to summertime. Another aspect that we see is that, what is it? I forgot my glass. Okay. Check the time. Another aspect is how the water is moving. So proper measurement is important to really show us that the models are doing a good job. So this left panel, it's showing that how indeed the water is moving. So we can see at the top layers, if we put the progressive vectors one after one, we can see that the water at the top is moving in, and at the bottom is moving out. So this is a real observation. So this real observation is very crucial to make sure that what we are seeing in terms of modeling is actually what we are happening in reality. This is only possible when you do a lot of field work. So it's a big effort. We spend a lot of human resources, a lot of funding. Not only we have to spend a lot of time planning, but it's a huge operation. The instruments that we use, they are quite expensive. So it comes from a basic instrument to measure currents with tides and waves. You're going to pay about $30,000 to $35,000 US. So it's and sometimes it gets hit by anchors, and then we had recently a problem with one of the instruments. And then how we do it. So this is one of the instruments that we deploy near the Sharjah coast. So that instrument is this one. We still have it, so that's good. It's a good sign. So the instrument here, it measures currents, tides, and waves. So you also have extra instruments measure temperature, salinity, and oxygen. And another one that we use, we put on the rope close to the surface, that one, to make sure that we capture the whole water column variability. So the instrument, we leave it in the water, depends on the type of experiment we do. So the problem is like when some happen, people can just go and damage, get sold, or the instrument itself gets defected. So it's especially here in the Gulf, where the temperature is and salinity are quite high. Another information that we have collected. So Bonaire is well known to have a good coral community compared to the other parts of the Gulf. And one of the hypotheses is that the region is being washed out with less hot water. So we have this kind of mechanism bringing cold water or less warm water towards the island. So we deployed this instrument, and then after we have going through the analysis, I was very pleased that we indeed found some events that showing that cold water close to the bottom, you can see the arrow pointing down there, bring cold water towards the system over there, and making sense that why the system can actually be like survive such a stream. So there are like events that first is up and then have a less warm temperature in the area. But you can see this event is not something that is constant. It actually, after the second week of June, you can see that the temperature went up again. So it's really, it's amazing because it's only during the few events, it's already enough to make sure that the system can cope with periods at very high temperature. So that information is very important for us because we are kind of put together the knowledge that we have in physical oceanography with the knowledge that there is already available in terms of marine biology of the system. So the idea is to try to understand how we can integrate both knowledge and help out each other. So currents are very important, so we need to know because everything is in the water is moving with currents. But then we have one station. So how we could like understand the whole Gulf? The only way is through numerical model because we cannot put one ADCP in every single kilometer because it's just not practical and there's no money for that. So the way we do, we use numerical models. So how we do numerical models? So they are like, yeah, I know that's the same reaction that I had back in 2000, back 25 years ago. First time that I tried to study those equations. At the time I was like, I have more space in my brain, so it was not that, now that not so much. So I was single, so I have more free time. Nowadays I'm very happy marriage with 2 nice kids. They're over there. So after more than 25 years, I managed to learn half of the equations. And I have more years to go, so I was getting tired, but now I have 2 boys that can help me out, so they can back me up now to help me out to understand the half of the equations now, so I can continue my work. And then I can actually, okay, let's see what happened in terms of if we implement the numerical model, now that I will be able to learn to understand the rest of the equations with the help of Luis and Sal, we would be able to understand where does it go to and where does it come from. So we try to understand the connectivity in the Gulf. So now I can say, so what equations? Let's go for it. Let's dig deep, okay? Let's make sure that I have my boys to help me out. So what I did dig deep. So this left one, oops, sorry. I have to click here. I don't know about the time, I'm just. So this one, what we did, like we released particles on the Iranian coast where I have the very healthy reefs. So we try to understand, so if you release reefs here, coral larvae here, so this is a passive model, so that means that there's nothing interfering the properties of the model, the particles, so it's just floating with the circulation. So it's just being washed. So you can see that can indeed spread throughout the Gulf. So with the right conditions, that could be a situation that this, that could be a situation that, where is the, sorry guys. That could be a situation that when we actually put the mortality, when we add that mortality rate, the life of the larvae, the speed of the larvae, so throughout the model simulation, you can see that there are a lot of mortality, which is normal. So we try to make the reality with equations. But even with this very high rate of mortality, you can see the spread of the plume of the dispersion of the larvae throughout the Gulf, and could give us indication that, in fact, could be some kind of, there is this kind of potential connectivity from one side of the Gulf towards the other side, showing that there are areas that could be play a big role as a source of larvae, and then as seeding of larvae from one place to other place, justify how come such environment with such harsh, extreme environment could cope with such extreme conditions, and then they are still surviving. So on the left panel, we have 2015, 16, 17, 18. So we try to see the interannual variability in this work that we could, based on the models, there are indeed some indications that there are some kind of connectivity throughout the marine environment here. So water circulation could indeed give us a very good information that we can apply in the numerical model to disperse those larvae. And of course, this comes with a lot of effort. Field work is a fun part. It's not an easy part, but it's the best part because you are in the field. So for the younger ones that love sea, dive, adventure, so I welcome you to visit our lab. And I want to thank you for your time. Sorry for my time. Thank you.
It's okay. Thanks, Georgianis. I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions for you after, but I will welcome our second speaker right now, Dr. Suhair Lashkar. Suhair is a senior scientist at New York University Abu Dhabi as well, and at the same Access Lab. He earned his PhD from the Sorbonne University in France. His research focuses on oceanography, climate, and marine biogeochemistry, with a particular emphasis on using numerical models, again, to study the coupling between ocean circulation and global biogeochemical cycles. Without further ado, come here, Suhair, and introduce the work. I think I've seen some of the slides. It's going to be super interesting.
Thank you very much.
If I can make that work.
Excellent. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much, Elise. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you very much for the invitation and giving me this opportunity to share some of our recent research with everyone. And thank you all for your time and for coming here today. So in my talk today, I will be trying to cover a different aspect from what my colleague Georgianis has covered, which will be more about the changes in the Arabian Gulf and more precisely the recent warming of the Arabian Gulf waters. However, the warming of the Gulf is a part of a global perturbation that is driven by climate change, and we can only understand it if we take it into in this broad context of global change. And so I will start with a little bit of context, and I like this graph that many of you may have already seen that shows the evolution of atmospheric CO2 concentrations over the last 800,000 years. And the data is based on direct measurements for the recent period, the last 60 years or so, and also from ice cores from the older times. And what I like about this graph, it actually highlights the tight coupling between the level of CO2 in the atmosphere and the Earth temperature. And it also shows that the modern era, or the industrial era, some people also refer to as the Anthropocene, is really unique in several aspects. And one of those aspects is the magnitude of the perturbation in the CO2 that is unprecedented, at least over the last 800,000 years and more. And also the rate of change. Of course, the CO2 has been changing over the past, but the rate of change in the CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere is unprecedented. And finally, there is a fundamental difference between this relationship between CO2 and temperature between the modern era and the previous natural climate variability, which is that in the past, the CO2 changes in the atmosphere were a response to changes in temperature that were initiated typically by changes in the orbital parameters of like the Earth tilt and precession, etc., which first led to an increase or a change in the amount of solar radiation that reaches the Earth, and the change in CO2 followed like with a lag, like typically a few hundred years. So it was a response, a feedback mechanism that amplified the initial change in the Earth temperature. But in the modern era, it's different in the sense that CO2 emissions or levels in the atmosphere is driving the change in temperature and not the other way around. So now, with CO2 and other greenhouse gases, there is an imbalance of the energy that the Earth absorbs. So typically, Earth radiates back less energy than what it receives from the sun. And the difference is this imbalance that we can estimate using recent observations. And we can also estimate how much of this excess energy is stored where, in which components of the Earth system. And this figure here shows how this energy excess is distributed, as I said, among the different components. And as you can see, the vast majority of this excess energy is stored in the ocean. Around 90% of this excess heat is actually stored in the ocean. And if you look at the atmosphere, it's only 1 to 2%. It's a very tiny fraction. So in that sense, the ocean plays a very critical role in mitigating the climate change perturbation. Without that role, the amplitude of the climate change would be, of course, much, much higher. But this comes at a cost to marine ecosystems and marine environment. And one of the most important changes that are related to the warming of the ocean is the loss of oxygen that we observe in the ocean, and that is typically referred to as ocean deoxygenation. So ocean deoxygenation happens essentially because of two different mechanisms. The first mechanism is that as the temperature of the seawater increases, the solubility of gases, including oxygen, decreases. And the ability of the ocean, of the seawater, to keep the CO2, oxygen, dissolved in the water decreases. And so there is a tendency to have more outgassing of oxygen. So this is the first mechanism. And the second mechanism has to do with the so-called increased stratification. So basically, the ocean is being warmed from the top, from the surface, and we have the amount or the amplitude of the warming is stronger at the surface than in deeper layers. And what this does, it increases the temperature gradient, the difference in temperature between the surface and the deeper layers, and increases the so-called stratification, which is the difference in density between the surface and the deeper layers, which becomes more stable. And by doing so, it makes the mixing between the different layers of the ocean more difficult. And therefore, the so-called ventilation of the ocean, which is the transport of surface water into deeper layers that brings with it high oxygen concentration to the ocean interior, is reduced. So we have these two mechanisms, the solubility effect and the ventilation or stratification effect. They both acting to reduce the oxygen content in the ocean. And this is not just a theory. This is also supported by observations. As you can see on the right panel, right figure, that is actually showing the evolution of oxygen, global oxygen content based on observations. These are different reconstructions of oxygen history over the last couple of decades, and they all show a steady decline in the amount of oxygen that is available in the ocean. There is a third major perturbation that is also connected to the increase in CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere, which is the so-called ocean acidification, and which is which happens as a result of the ocean taking up some of the CO2 or excess CO2 in the atmosphere. So typically, oceans take up about 25% of the total anthropogenic CO2 emissions or fossil fuel emissions every year. This helps mitigating again the climate change perturbation by reducing the amount of greenhouse gas effect we would have otherwise. But it comes again at a cost to the marine environment, because as the CO2 enters the water, it dissolves and forms an acid called the carbonic acid, which drops the pH of the water. And again, this is not just a theory, this is also supported by observations. As you can see, this is an example showing the seawater pH in a station near Hawaii. And it shows this steady decline in the pH over the recent decades. We see the same thing from different places in the global ocean. So ocean warming, ocean deoxygenation, ocean acidification, these are three connected perturbations. Usually they co-occur. And of course, this has strong impacts, mostly detrimental impacts on the ecosystems. And when they happen together, they make it harder for the ecosystems as well as for the individual marine organisms to cope with these perturbations at the same time. So with this, after this general introduction, which looks at the larger picture, now I would like to move on to the core of the subject, which is the Arabian Gulf and the warming of the Arabian Gulf that we observe and that Georgianich has already highlighted in his talk. So if we look at the average summer temperature globally, the Gulf hosts the hottest sea surface temperatures. And as Georgianich mentioned, in the Gulf, the temperature regularly exceeds 34 degrees Celsius in summer in the Gulf. Sometimes when we have marine heat waves, it can reach up to 36 or 37. So we start from a very high baseline. But in addition to that, if we look at the trends, and here I'm showing you the trends in sea surface temperature based on satellite data, the Gulf actually is among the fastest warming water bodies in the global ocean. And if you look at the rate of warming, it is at least 3 times faster than the global average. And it is generally faster than most regional seas that are located in the tropical and subtropical latitudinal band. In particular, if we compare the warming in the Gulf and the warming in the Sea of Oman or the Gulf of Oman, there is at least a factor 3 to 5. So the warming in the Gulf, in the Arabian Gulf, is much faster, has been much faster in comparison to the warming that we observe, for example, in the Sea of Oman. So the question here is, why is that the case? What is driving this very rapid warming in the Gulf? And what are the implications? How does this warming affect the circulation? And does it have an impact on the environment, on the marine environment? So in order to answer these questions, let's look at the observations. The problem, as Georgianich has mentioned, there is an issue with the lack of observations or very sparse observational coverage for the Gulf. And to convince you, I show here a comparison between that shows the observational coverage in the Arabian Gulf in comparison to other regional seas. Some of them are also semi-enclosed seas. And to have a fair comparison, I divided the total number of observations that are available in the largest oceanographic database that is called the World Ocean Database. I divided the number of observations by the area of each sea. So it's basically a density of observation in each of these regional seas. And you can see that the Gulf is by far the least well observed, the least sampled among these different regional seas. In particular for parameters like salinity, oxygen, or nutrients. But even for temperature, for which we have some observations, it is not well distributed in time. Most of the observations are coming from few individual years, which makes it very hard to study long-term trends and variability. However, this does not mean that that the observations don't exist. They are just very quite rare and not enough to understand, as I said, long-term trends. Nevertheless, we can also get some inspiration or see some patterns from the available observations. And here I show some historical observations of oxygen in the Gulf. And you can see all the profiles that were, sorry. Okay, so how to go? Okay, so you can see here the black profiles are observations that were collected in the late 60s, more precisely in September 1968. And this is late summer, and you see that pattern that we expect in summer, which is to have relatively high concentrations near the surface because of the exchange with the atmosphere. But because of the strong stratification in summer, we see that oxygen drops as we go to deeper layers, typically below 20 meters or so. But what you can see is that even at depth, the concentration of oxygen in those old profiles never crossed this so-called hypoxic threshold, which represent a level of oxygen deficit that makes it very difficult for most marine organisms to survive. So hypoxia has not been observed then. But if you look at more recent profiles, especially after the year 2000, for example, there was this profile that was collected from near Qatar in October 2000, and more recently, a couple of profiles collected in the Iranian exclusive economic zone, also in late summer. You can see that now we cross that hypoxic threshold. So we have evidence of hypoxia happening at large scale in summer in the Gulf. So what does this mean? First, it is very surprising because the Gulf is very shallow and it's also oligotrophic in the sense that it's not one of the very productive ecosystems, or at least in terms of biological production, compared to other regions where we observe hypoxia. And also it is relatively shallow. But these observations tend to suggest that maybe the conditions are really changing over the recent decades and years. So the question is, are these observations reflecting a trend, a long-term trend? Is there an expansion of hypoxia in the Arabian Gulf? And if so, what is causing this change? Has it to do with the rapid warming that I discussed before? So these are the kind of questions that we cannot answer or explore using observations only because of the lack of observations, as I mentioned, but we can use models to try to answer. And I will not show equations this time, but I would just say that for people who are not familiar with ocean models, so an ocean model is basically simply a practical implementation of the ocean theory that complements observations. So basically, we have a set of equations that govern the circulation, the physics of how the water moves in the ocean, also the chemistry, how we think the chemistry should work, and the biogeochemistry. And those equations, we try to solve them on a grid, a three-dimensional grid, and to use a computer, to solve them on a computer. So here, to give you an example, what you see here on this figure is a simulation of surface chlorophyll using one of these models. And if you zoom in, you can start to see the grid of the model. And the size of each grid cell is what defines the resolution of the model. So the smaller or the finer this grid cell or the resolution, the better is the resolution, and the more processes the model can represent, and hopefully the more accurate the simulation, or the closer to reality the simulation is expected. However, the higher the resolution, the higher the computational cost. So just to give you an idea, a simulation of the Arabian Gulf using 1 kilometer horizontal resolution that extends over 30 years, which is not not something that is alone. I mean, if you are studying climate or climate change, typically we run the model for longer than this period. So a 30-year simulation takes 2 months of computation using over 300 processors. So in total, if you look at the total computational cost, it's over 500,000 processor hour. So these are massive simulations. These are not the simulations that we can run on a personal computer. These are typically performed on large clusters of computers or supercalculators. Okay, so, but once we have that model and once the model is validated with observations, we can do many things. We can reconstruct trends for which we don't have enough data. We could test hypotheses. We can ask what-if questions or scenarios, perform virtual experiments that we cannot do in real ocean. And of course, we can make projections and predictions. So now I would like to show you some of the results from those ocean simulations. And let's start with the first mystery of why is the Gulf warming at much faster rate than, let's say, the Sea of Oman. So what you see in the figure here is the simulated SST, or more exactly, the trends in the simulated sea surface temperature. And it is very similar to the trends I showed before in satellite-based SST. So the model is consistent with the observations. Now the question is, what is driving the faster rate of warming in the Gulf? And we found it has to do essentially with changes in the winds, the Shamal winds that Georgios has mentioned. Because if you look at the intensity of those winds in summer of the last 30 or 40 years, it appears that the winds have been weakening over that period. So when the Shamal winds or when the winds weaken, what does this mean? So first of all, there is a mechanism that is called evaporative cooling, which is simply to say that having stronger winds leads to more evaporation, and evaporation leads to dissipation of heat that is more efficient from the water. So a weakening of the winds means less dissipation or less heat loss through so-called latent heat fluxes. So this is the first mechanism. It's basically the same mechanism that when you blow on a hot soup, it cools. So it's the same thing happening in the ocean. So winds help the ocean or the temperature to cool down. If the wind is weakening, that mechanism becomes less efficient, so we have an accumulation of heat. So this is the first mechanism. But we also found out that as a result of this weakening of the winds, there is also an accumulation of air moisture over the Gulf. So the winds help disperse moisture that comes from evaporation. If we have weaker winds, there is less of this dispersion. There is also a tendency to have more air masses coming from the Arabian Sea. Typically, they have higher air moisture. And so the result is that we have an increase in the total amount of water vapor, as you can see in the figure on the right, that shows the trends in the water vapor in the atmosphere. And you can see that over the Gulf, especially, we have a very fast increase in water vapor. And as you know, water vapor is a very strong greenhouse gas. So what this does, it increases heat trapping near the surface. So these are two mechanisms, but they are both linked to the change in the local winds, the Shamal winds during summer. Okay, now what are the implications of this differential warming between the Gulf and the Sea of Oman? So again, I will not spend too much time explaining the circulation because Georgios has done a good job explaining this so-called overturning circulation. So basically we have an inflow of surface, low-density water coming from the Arabian Sea into the Gulf, and then in the Gulf, because of the high density, the high salinity, there is a return flow, an outflow that occurs at depth, and then tends to bring dense water from the Gulf into the Sea of Oman. Now, the fuel of that circulation is the density contrast between the Gulf and the Sea of Oman. with the warming of the Gulf, what happens is that we are reducing that density gradient or difference, because the warmer the water, the less dense it becomes. So that gradient of temperature between the Arabian Gulf and the Sea of Oman causes a gradient in density, and actually it reduces the gradient of density between these two seas. So this is exactly what we see in the simulated trends. So here I show you on the right, you can see the trends in the temperature of the Gulf in red as a function of the month of the year. And you can see in purple the density difference between the Gulf and the Sea of Oman. And you can see that the warming is the strongest in spring and summer, whereas in winter, the warming is not very, it's not statistically significant, it's weak. And you can see that the change in the density gradient somehow mirrors the change in temperature. So we have a decrease in the density gradient between the Arabian Gulf and the Sea of Oman that is strongest in summer. Whereas in winter, there is a slight increase in the density gradient, and this is caused by an increase in salinity of the Gulf. Remember, as I said, in winter, the warming in the Gulf is very weak. So the temperature effect is very weak then, so it's mostly driven by salinity. But in summer, we see the impact of the strong warming of the Gulf in the density gradient, and then we see it in the intensity of the overturning circulation, the green curve, which is very similar, looks very similar to the changes in the density gradient with a little bit of a time lag. But you see a decrease in the intensity of this overturning in summer and a slight increase in winter. So why is this important? Because it has some implications for the biogeochemistry of the Gulf. So if we look at how the nutrients are transported into the Gulf, the nutrients come essentially from the Arabian Sea. And in winter, surface waters, the surface inflow tends to have relatively high concentrations of nutrients because there is a lot of mixing happening in the northern Arabian Sea and the Sea of Oman because of what we call winter convection. So the surface water is relatively rich in nutrients in winter. So there is some inflow of nutrients in winter from the Sea of Oman into the Gulf. So the net is a net supply of nutrients into the Gulf. In summer, surface waters are very poor in nutrients because of the strong stratification. So the incoming or the inflowing waters are very poor in nutrients. However, the outflow has more nutrients than the inflow. So the net is that the Gulf is exporting nutrients to the Sea of Oman in summer. So supply in winter and export in summer. Now, with the changes that I just mentioned in terms of the circulation that are different between winter and summer, what happens is in winter we have a slight increase in the overturning circulation. So we have a slight increase in nutrients that are supplied from the Sea of Oman. And in summer, we have a decrease in the overturning, and this means a decrease in the export of nutrients. So these two factors actually add up to increase the total amount of nutrients available in the Gulf. So there's an accumulation of nutrients in the Gulf. And with that accumulation, as you can expect, we have higher biological productivity and higher amount of organic matter that is decomposed in what we call remineralization, and this process consumes oxygen. So we have an increase in biological consumption of oxygen that we see in our model, and this results an expansion of the hypoxia, the summer hypoxia. As you can see, that evolves that we have a higher area in the Gulf that is prone to hypoxia as we go, as time goes on. So there is another consequence for this because respiration consumes oxygen, it releases carbon. So an increase in respiration means less oxygen, more carbon, and as I mentioned before, carbon acts as, it forms like carbonic acid and it acts as an acid, so it decreases the pH of the water. So the consequence is an acceleration of ocean acidification near the bottom in the Gulf. And you can see this if you look at the trends in the pH in the Gulf. If you look at the surface, the average Gulf pH, and you compare it to the global ocean pH trend, so we have a steady decline, and it looks very similar. So we have a relatively similar trend in the pH, and this is simply because it is driven by the global anthropogenic CO2 coming from the atmosphere into the ocean. So it is driven by this anthropogenic CO2 in the atmosphere entering the ocean. However, if you look at the bottom of the Gulf, especially the minimum pH recorded every year, and you look at the trend looks steeper. So we have a faster decline in that pH, and this is because of this additional impact of increased respiration that accelerates acidification. And again, this is related to the warming that is very much faster in the Gulf in comparison to the Sea of Oman. So these three perturbations, warming, deoxygenation, and acidification that I explained in the introduction, they're also happening in the Gulf. And they are happening in a simultaneous way. And some organisms can cope with one perturbation when it is happening in isolation, but when you have three perturbations at the same time, of course, this makes it harder for these ecosystems and organisms. And because of that, the system is crossing certain thresholds, so we have more and more extremes. And here, what I'm showing here is the area of the Gulf that is prone to the co-occurrence of either 2 or 3 different perturbations at the same time. And if you look at the red curve, it shows the area of the Gulf that is exposed to extreme temperature. Extreme oxygen means low oxygen, and extreme pH means low pH. And you can see that in the early 80s, that area was very small. And in the late 2010, where the simulation ends, we have a much faster progress of that area. So it has increased by a factor 10. What you can also see is that there's a lot of interannual variability. So this change is not smooth. There's a lot of fluctuations. And we found out that those fluctuations seem to be related to large-scale climate variability, such as El Niño and other climate variability modes, which means that the changes that are happening in the equatorial Pacific or the North Atlantic are also having a clear impact on the environment in the Gulf. So I would like to wrap up, and I would say that the Gulf is warming very rapidly over the recent decades, and it appears that this has to do with the change in the local winds, in the Shamal winds. And there is also a lot of interannual variability that is modulated by these large-scale climate variability or teleconnections. This fast warming of the Gulf has some consequences for the circulation, and especially the exchange with the Sea of Oman. And these changes appear to have an impact on the chemistry or the chemical environment and biogeochemistry of the Gulf as well. And we see an increase in the extreme conditions, not only in terms of temperature, but also in terms of oxygen and acidity. And finally, I would say that we need more observations because it is important to validate those simulations, but they are also important to improve our models because we need observations to calibrate and evaluate our models. And this is very critical in our region. As I showed before, this is one of the least sampled regions in the world ocean. And with that, I would like to thank my colleagues at Mubadala Arabian Center for Climate and Environment, and also all of you for being here. And I'm happy to take questions. Thank you. Okay. Okay.
I'm going to ask, Georgie, come here, and please raise your hand. First question. Oh, yes, Georgines. Can we have a microphone over there? Yes.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, so earlier you mentioned that the reason for the Gulf heating up so much was because of the lower wind speeds and the drop in Shamal winds. But you didn't mention exactly why the Shamal winds are slowing down. This is like my
That's true.
question.
You didn't say why.
Well, that's a great question. It's a very good question, and it is not very clear, but I would say that there is a theory, or let's say a hypothesis, so it's not it's something that we need to further investigate. But one hypothesis that because of the very strong warming of the Arabian Peninsula, the land, over the recent decades, so what happens is the pressure, so when you warm the land, the pressure tends to decrease. So there is a decrease in the air pressure over the Arabian Peninsula over this period. We call this heat law, so like in meteorology. And this, if you look at this sort of depression or low, if you have like a stronger low, it will direct the winds in opposite direction to the Shamal winds. So the Shamal coming from the northwest, and if you have a low over the Arabian Peninsula, it will normally direct the wind from the south to the north. So this counteracts the effect of the Shamal, and this is just a hypothesis, but needs further investigation. But that's a great question.
Thank you. Another question? We're gonna, yeah.
Yes.
Yes, my question for the salinity in the Gulf. The evaporation we have is, you said, 2 to 3 meters per year. And what impact is it from the desalination from all the different countries? Is that a very big impact or is that negligible?
Well, in what we see, we have published a paper about long-term evaluation in terms of desalination. What would be the impact of because of course it's when you remove salt of the water, you're gonna have the brine, and the temperature is quite high. Yeah, but based on the models that we apply, we don't see like although the exchange is not so high, like from the Gulf to outside, the impact of the desalination is still not really significant. The Gulf is still able to kind of flush it out and then compensate it, although it's not that much, but we didn't see that much implication in terms of, we don't see the trend in salinity going up because of the desalination for now.
So if I can just add, just to give you like some numbers, because we did some simulations where we exactly test the impact of desalination on the salinity in the Gulf. So locally, the impact can be big, but at the scale of the entire Gulf, it's very small. To give you just an idea, the order of like 0.1 PSU. So it is so far, but of course it is projected that there will be more like desalination plants, etc. in the future. So it could increase the impact in the future, but so far at the scale of the Gulf, it is limited.
Thank you. We have one question right in the middle. Can we do that? Yes.
Thank you. I have a question. As you know, according to the construction in coastal area and making artificial island, I want to know what is the impact of this kind of thing to the physical oceanography elements like salinity or currents or something like that. Thank you.
I think, Georgines, you can answer that.
You mean the impact of the construction itself? The biggest impact we see is on the hydrodynamics. yeah, because where before there's nothing, so now we have a structure that will deviate the water movement. Then we have a problem with sediment transport. Then we have erosion in one area, accretion in another area, and depends on the shape of the construction. We're going to have effect also on the residence time. So we're going to increase the time that the water gets flushed. So then we have a kind of water quality problem, and then we'll have implication on the marine system. So all types of construction, they have to be able to run different scenarios to evaluate all aspects. So it could cause really serious damage to the system.
Thanks. Oh, sorry, I didn't see you. Over there? Yes. The lady in purple, she had a question. After, okay.
So the factors such as like the ocean warming and ocean deoxygenation and ocean acidification, which of these like greatly exacerbate the conditions of marine life, and how much so are they really like impacting them?
So what is the impact of these perturbations on marine life?
On marine life.
Yeah, well, there are different examples. For example, if we take each perturbation separately, for instance, of course, warming, the most obvious impact is on corals. So corals, they have a certain tolerance to temperature, like high temperature. Once that temperature threshold is crossed, there could be like a bleaching event or a mortality of the corals. But there's also an impact on fish population, I guess, although I'm not a specialist, but I guess temperature affects many processes in the ocean. Now, if you think about, let's say, ocean acidification, it is very important for organisms, especially what we call calcifiers, organisms that require, like they need to build calcium carbonate structures like shells and skeletons, because what the low pH does, it makes these structures less stable. I mean, if the pH drops below a certain threshold, it becomes harder and even impossible. I mean, if it goes really low, for these organisms to keep these structures. And there have been many observations, for example, showing some of these plankton that use they have these shells, small. They can even start to dissolve if the pH is very low. If you think regarding the ocean deoxygenation, again, most large organisms have requirements for oxygen. They need a certain minimum of oxygen to survive or reproduce. So again, if the oxygen levels drop below those requirements, they can simply die, or even if they don't die, they will be impacted negatively. So yeah.
Actually, I do have a follow-up question on that. You showed the area where the lower pH, lower oxygen level, and so on. Mm-hmm. This area is actually growing, expanding. Yeah. But are you able to see if those areas are more coastal or coastal area or offshore area? Where is it growing
Yes. So we see this happening in the deeper part of the Gulf. So it's mostly, for example, not really in the area around the UAE, because it tends to be very shallow. So it's mostly the deeper part, which is more in the Iranian, exclusive economic zone, where we have the deepest part, and the central Gulf, because this goes with depth. So if the depth is like 10 or 15 meters, we don't have, still, and there have been some observations in our lab, the paper showing nocturnal, during night, that the hypoxia can develop, even at very shallow depths, like few meters. But this kind of hypoxia I was talking about, it's a seasonal feature that lasts a couple of months, and this happens essentially in the deep part of the Gulf.
Okay, thank you. We had, one question just at the back.
She had the same question, actually.
It was the same question. Okay, well, perfect. Do we have another question? Oh, yes, Mark. Yes.
Yeah, thank you for the great presentations. I just was wondering about the longer-term history, because of my background in archaeology, paleontology, the change in a long period of time, whether we should be looking at some of our archaeological data in the region. My PhD was on fishing in the Gulf, and of course we can analyze fish otoliths and things like this to look at the ancient paleo temperatures and maybe paleo salinity in the Gulf. It would be interesting to prove, because of course people still are skeptical about some people. I mean I'm not, but some people are skeptical about the changes that you're showing, warming and stepping up. But if we look at over a longer period of time, anyway, it's something that maybe we can collaborate on. I'm with the Natural History Museum Abu Dhabi, so we're near to New York University, and maybe it's something we can look at in the future, trying to model the ancient paleo temperatures in the Gulf. I mean, I looked at samples from Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and there are some very interesting differences looking at this long distance time. But I think it gives another dimension. Obviously, you have the data more recently, but it's worth considering looking at ancient dugong bones and dolphin bones and fish bones to maybe get some new, I don't know what your thoughts are on that, if you think that's feasible.
I agree. I think it's a great idea to have some, to compare like what we see with the models to paleo, like based paleo data, and see if there is some support to what the models like suggest. I think it's a great idea, and we are very open to discuss and maybe seek some collaboration. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
All right. I do have one more question. Diogenes, you showed the connectivity between the different parts of the Gulf and showing how actually the core that we have here may have origin up north. Did you or are you looking at modeling some other organisms, other biological phenomenon like this, and showing the connectivity within the Gulf?
Yeah, like the model at the moment, we did that for coral larvae, but since we have a biological component, we can also try to look at fish larvae and try to see, because of course I'm a physical oceanographer. Like the biology part, I have to ask my wife and you guys. So we can try to include that information and see what we get. So of course, it's like he mentioned, it's a model. So it's very the information is not let's say 100%, but give us a very good clue about what is happening when you put the right information. Then we have room for different type of biology models as well.
Excellent. Thank you. Oh, we have one last. Dr. Hung.
Thanks a lot. I've learned a lot today from your presentation. I have two questions, very quick one. First of all, follow up with Eliz's question about how you can apply your model to understand the dispersal of not only, for example, like you have done for coral larvae, right? But maybe we can also apply it for to study the dispersal of seeds and plant fragmentation on seagrass, because I have a significant seagrass ecosystem in the Gulf. And actually, we are trying to understand the genetic diversity and connectivity of the seagrass in the Gulf, and maybe your model can also help to explain, if we will have the data, how the seagrass meadow along the Gulf are connected or isolated. That's something I really want to to maybe, if we have an opportunity, discuss with you more. And I have another question about, so your simulation in terms of the ocean deacidification, acidification, and warming, because we have a significant ecosystem of seagrass, which is autotrophic. So basically, they can have to reduce the effect of ocean acidification and also the ocean generation. Have you considered those factors in your models?
So your question is if we have considered like eutrophication?
So basically, in terms of physics, right, we have ocean acidification and oceanation. But also we have a massive seagrass ecosystem here that can reduce those phenomena.
Producing oxygen from the bottom.
Yes, so they can contribute oxygen into the water column, and they can also at the same time reduce the carbon in the water.
Yeah, so the model, I must say, the biogeochemical model is very simple. We have a very simple representation of, the biological processes that are represented are very simple. We don't have, for example, an explicit representation of seagrass. So what we have is primary producers like phytoplankton, zooplankton, and detritus, and some detritus like zinc, and there is mineralization or respiration, but it's very basic. So we don't have all these details, but maybe depending on the kind of question and the scale at which we look, like if we're looking really at a very local scale, maybe it is very important to add a little bit more of complexity. But the problem with, if you add complexity to a model, you need to have also a lot of observations to calibrate, because then if you add more parameters without observations, then it becomes too complex and not well constrained. So for specific applications, and if we have observations that can support the model, yes, we could try to add a little bit more complexity, but at the scale of the Gulf, I think it will be more difficult.
Yeah, just to conclude, the model is a tool that we try to implement to, of course, try to overcome the problem with the observation. And some of the equations that we use in the model, they use the results to start a new process. So if you don't give the right information into the model, you're going to have a result. That result could be meaningless. So it's, as Zuhair mentioned, it's very complex when you try to input a lot of process, and then computationally, mathematically talking about, and then you have to make sure that makes sense. Otherwise, you're going to waste your time.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, Zuhair. Thank you, Georgines. Thank you all for that evening, for coming to us and staying until the end. It was a very interesting evening. I think it's a very important topic that needs a bit more highlight, definitely, because it's part of the life and of the natural history of the world. Next talk will be on the 12th of June, and we will be talking about dugongs, and we will have the opportunity to speak with some scientists coming from all the way from Australia to come here to study our dugong population. So that would be very interesting. All right, see you soon. Thank you.